So Gilad, thank you for joining us today on the eve of Rosh Hashanah and on the eve of, in Israel, we are on the eve of the dramatic Supreme Court discussion about, it's basically a discussion about the doctrine, the reasonableness doctrine, but what we have learned today is this was a discussion about the very basis structure of the state of Israel, and with all the connection to the Declaration of Independence and the basics. So you're going to tell us more about that. I really appreciate you taking us after a long day. The stage is yours, and again, thank you.
So, shalom, dear friends and partners. Boker tov to many of you, or most of you, and erev tov to my Israeli colleagues that joined this important Zoom. I want to thank UnXeptable for inviting me again to share some thoughts and remarks with all of you. And I do want to start with repeating what I said in the previous discussion I attended through Zoom with you, and that's my deep appreciation to the amazing work UnXeptable is doing together with many of you in North America and in other parts of the Jewish world. I do want to leave enough time to give you the updates about the things that happened today in the court and other relevant developments. So I will not go into the deep analysis I shared with you, why your involvement in this amazing wave of civil protest that is taking place in Israel is so critical. But I do want to repeat my, again, deep belief that you are playing a very important role in alerting the Jewish people, in the Jewish communities around the world, in alerting Western administrations that are devoted to democratic values and also to the relations with Israel. And I tend to believe that the fact Netanyahu chose to fly first to your area, to the West Coast, and only then to go to New York has to do with the fact that together with you, we are really challenging in one of his main brands as the leader of the startup nation. And together with UnXeptable, I think we all succeeded to send a very strong message that the startup nation cannot sustain itself in a shrinking democracy. And I think Netanyahu is coming to your region in order to show that he can still play a role in the Silicon Valley, that is still a global leader. And the welcome protest you're planning for him will be very important in the end to remind Netanyahu, his followers, and all of us Israelis that he is not welcomed today in the way he was welcomed in the Silicon Valley in his previous term or before he signed on this judicial coup. I also want to use this opportunity in order to wish you all Shana Tova, Happy New Year. I really believe that the next year is going to be extremely critical for the future of the state of Israel. Our tradition reminds us with this special idea that we open our year in a festive way, but also with a demand for bedek bait, cheshbon nefesh, with the demand for repentance. And this unique combination of hope and a strong demand to be committed, or to commit ourselves to what we did and what we need to do in the future. This is I think, a unique Jewish contribution to the challenges we face in Israel and around the Jewish world. Now I will, with your permission, address the current development. It's important to say that the Israeli Supreme Court is now entering its 13th hour of an ongoing hearing. And this is the first time in the history of the Israeli Supreme Court that the petitions are being presented in front of a full bench of all 15 Supreme Court judges. The hearing started, as I said, 12 hours ago, and probably it will continue till midnight. And the reason it is such a long, challenging day, and I spent most of the day in the Supreme Court. I heard the procedure in the court. The main reason is the desire of the judges to have 1 day of hearing, and then to move forward with writing the ruling. And today, the Supreme Court actually heard a combination of 8 different petitions that all of them were aimed to cancel or to overrule the last amendment to the basic law of the judiciary that dealt with the cancellation of the reasonability doctrine. Now, it's important to say that the Israeli Supreme Court is quite a diverse court. There is an ongoing attempt of the right-wing coalition to suggest that the Israeli Supreme Court is not diverse enough. But from a legal perspective, this is definitely the most diverse Supreme Court Israel ever had. And we could see today that they are deeply involved in an open discussion between the Supreme Court judges about the right constitutional approaches towards the petitions. And in spite of the fact I have many years of experience with the Israeli Supreme Court, I want to be careful, and I think it is too soon to take a guess what will be the result of this procedure. It is important to remember that actually the court addressed today 2 critical constitutional questions. They came together in the different petitions, or they were presented together in the different petitions, but the Supreme Court, justly so, identified them as separated issues. The first issue that is definitely at the highest level of the constitutional debate in Israel has to do with the question of the authority of the court to overrule basic laws. I'm sure that all of you are aware to the fact that Israel doesn't have a written legislated constitution, but the Knesset, the legislative body of Israel, since the 50s, developed a set of basic laws. Now, for years, those basic laws were considered to be fundamental legislation, And yet the Knesset didn't give those basic laws any unique legal status. They were not legislated in a special way, and the Knesset didn't identify them as an higher level of legislation. This situation was changed at the beginning of the at the mids of the 90s with the legislation of the two basic laws that dealt with fundamental human rights, and the way the Supreme Court understood this act of constitutional legislation. And since the 90s, Israel is in a new constitutional era in which the Supreme Court has the ability to overrule Knesset legislation, regular Knesset legislation. And today, for the first time, it's not the first time, but this is the first serious opportunity in which the court is asking itself, do I have the authority not only to overrule regular legislation that goes against the basic laws, but do I have the authority to overrule basic laws, constitutional legislation, in an extreme situation? This is the first question which is presented by the court. And then, if the court establishes its ability, its authority to overrule basic laws, then there is the specific question: does this legislation that canceled or minimized dramatically the reasonability doctrine by stating that it cannot be implemented if we are talking about a decision that was taken by the government or by the different ministries, does this specific legislation meets the standards that the Supreme Court develops for the cancellation or overruling basic laws legislated by the Knesset? So those are the two important questions that were presented today to the court, and the court is actually going to address those two independent but connected questions in its ruling. Now, the first question about the general authority of the Supreme Court to overrule the constitutional legislation or the basic laws has to do with a constitutional historic question. What is the source for the Knesset authority to deal with constitutional legislation? How come the regular legislative body of Israel can also legislate those constitutional basic laws? You know, from the American experience, that in order to amend the Constitution, in order to write new chapters for the Constitution, you need a special procedure that definitely involves the legislative branch of the US, but also involves the different states. Israel doesn't have a clear procedure or a unique procedure to this constitutional legislation, as I said. So the question is actually, who gave the regular legislative arm the ability to deal with constitutional legislation? And this discussion is deeply connected to the question of what is the status, the legal status of Israel's Declaration of Independence. And does this declaration plays also a constitutional role and not only a historical role or educational and spiritual role. And in the last few decades, both the Knesset and the Supreme Court upgraded the legal and constitutional status of this declaration. It is mentioned in those two basic laws from the beginning of the 90s. It is recognized more and more by the Supreme Court itself in its rulings in the last few decades as a legal source to the definition of the state of Israel as a Jewish and a democratic state. And actually today, we heard from the government that was not represented by the Attorney General, because the Attorney General basically refused to protect this legislation, and the government had to hire a private attorney to represent it in the Supreme Court. The government basically said that the Declaration of Independence is not playing a role in this constitutional concept that the Knesset can legislate basic laws. Why the government is trying to push back the Declaration of Independence? Because the Declaration of Independence holds the basic democratic norms of the State of Israel. And if in the end this declaration is the constitutional source for the Knesset authority, then the claim that the basic laws cannot contradict the Declaration of Independence and its democratic features is a valid claim. So the government, in a very strange way, they are presenting themselves as the government that is sustaining Zionist values, and they are protecting the core Zionist nature of the State of Israel, but they are the ones that are trying to push back the status of the Declaration of Independence. Other players, those that submitted the petition, the members of the opposition, but also the Attorney General, they are saying that in the end, the ability of the Knesset to legislate those constitutional basic laws is established on the basis of the Declaration of Independence. And it means that those basic laws cannot go directly against the values and the basic concepts of this declaration. Now, our feeling, following carefully the remarks of the judges today, our feeling is that there is a majority among the 15 judges for this concept that the source for the Knesset constitutional authority is invested in Israel's Declaration of Independence. It means that the basic laws cannot go directly against the values and the principles of the declaration, and it mainly means that the judicial branch has the authority to check this specific question. Does the basic laws that the Knesset is legislating meet the standards of the Declaration of Independence? And our feeling is that there is today a majority for the first time in the Israeli Supreme Court to build or to establish another floor of Israel's constitutional theory by saying that we have regular legislation, we have the constitutional basic laws that are legislated by the Knesset, but in the end, there is a higher level of legislation, and those are the values and the principles of the Declaration of Independence. So in regard to the first question, I'm more comfortable to suggest that probably the Supreme Court will send a clear message here. And why it is important? It is extremely important because we don't know yet if the Supreme Court is willing to implement this theory in regard to the reasonability clause. And there is a real option that the Supreme Court will say, yes, I have the authority, but this is not the right case to use this judicial force in its full capacity, and we might end with a clear yes for the first question. And in regard to the second question, the court will suggest different methods of moving forward. For example, sending the legislation back to the Knesset for some amendments. But if you remember that actually now we are dealing with the first feature of the judicial coup, and we already know that they will not be satisfied only with this reasonability doctrine. And they are planning to continue. And they are planning to amend many more basic laws. And they are planning to use this tool of amending basic laws in order to establish many more features of this judicial coup. The fact that the Supreme Court, even if today it's on a theoretical base, the fact that the Supreme Court is drawing a red line and telling the coalition and the government, we have the authority to overrule basic law if it breaches the core values of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. This is a very powerful and important warning sign for the Knesset and for the government. And in that regard, I can say that this was an important, challenging, but fruitful day in the Israeli Supreme Court. We don't know yet the end result, but I think that an important message was already sent today by most of the judges to the government. And one of the ways to identify it is to see this level of or the aggressiveness of the government's responses to this day of hearing in the Supreme Court. And the Likud, Netanyahu's party, just released a very aggressive response to this day of hearing. We heard the private attorney the government hired during the day, and he used very aggressive claims around the first question. And definitely they are trying to intimidate the judges not to go in this direction. But I think that the Supreme Court message around the first question is quite clear. I do want to add two more remarks, and then we'll open it for your questions. This day of hearing was presented by the Israeli media and by, this open, wide public discourse in the social media and, in other circles of communications. This day was presented as an extremely critical day. And I'm not trying to suggest it is not important and not critical, but I think that we must remember that this judicial coup doesn't start with the reasonability doctrine and doesn't end with this doctrine. And in the end, this is only one feature of a much wider plan. More than that, not all elements of this judicial coup have to do directly with the authorities of the Supreme Court and the authority or the relations between different branches of government. This judicial coup or this coup against democracy includes many other chapters. One example is the new legislation that the government is trying to push in regard to the regulation of the media market in Israel. And in different ways, we don't have all the time to explore it, and I'm not so sure that we need to explore all the details, but in a very clear and aggressive way, the Israeli government is trying to adopt some of the moves that were presented in Hungary and Poland against the free media, both the public broadcast and the private media channels. And this new legislation includes a clear move to lower the wall between the government and the governing bodies of the public broadcast, and to lower the wall between the ability of the government to interfere in the different channels of private media. And this is only one example to a legislation that is not directly connected to the relations between different branches of government and the judicial branch, but this is definitely part of the anti-democratic coup that this government is leading. So we all need to remember that yes, we experienced a very important day. Yes, we really need this alert of the Israeli Supreme Court that the Knesset cannot use the basic laws in order to escape judicial review. But in the end, we face a much wider front. And I'm saying it because we really need to remember that even if we win this specific battle, this coup continues. And it even might be more aggressive if we win the case in the court. And I'm saying it in order to remind all of us that we are only in the midst of a very long battle here in Israel and around the world. The other thing I want to mention, and then I will move to address your questions, is that aside to to this suggested legislation, which is the foundation of the judicial coup. I'm talking about all the different pieces of legislation. There is another element in this judicial coup. And I know that UnXeptable invited Yair Neorai a few days ago to share with you the way the Israeli right-wing ultra-nationalist government is actually building the infrastructures of the anti-democratic, anti-pluralistic, racist, messianic, ultra-nationalist forces. And this government is fully invested in constitutional amendments, but it is more invested in actually enlarging dramatically the infrastructures or strengthening dramatically the infrastructures of those anti-democratic forces that are working in Israel. And today, as an example, and I'm ending with it, while we were in the courts, the Knesset Finance Committee shifted $500 million of new Israeli shekels from welfare projects to targets and goals that are deeply connected to those sectorial players that are standing behind the judicial coup. Now, any protest or every protest need in the end to focus on leading symbols or leading issues, and it must have a well-branded agenda. But we need to remember, again, that this judicial coup is being pushed forward in 1,000 ways, in different ways. And we need to be extremely sophisticated in insisting to address those different venues, and in remembering that it doesn't start with one piece of constitutional legislation, and it will not end with a successful Supreme Court ruling in Jerusalem. Ophir,
Thank you, Gilad. This was fascinating. I was waking up this morning I went to sleep with the live stream of the court ruling, the court discussion hearing, and I woke up and it was still going, and I woke up to something that I couldn't believe I heard, and this was that the private lawyer of the government, on top of Simcha Rotman, that was kind of like representing himself and the judicial committee, was basically talking about the idea that they were sharing. I mean, I'm always trying to not to compare to the U.S. and Israel constitution because it's different. But imagine if someone would basically stand and talk to the judges and say like, well, you cannot judge based on the constitution because those people who wrote the constitution were not elected, right? This is what they said. I mean, like there was the independence, the Declaration of Independence of Israel is something that 37 people was writing in a hurry, and therefore there is no, you cannot actually take the judicial ruling based on that. And I was like, we are walking on the street with 8 months with a T-shirt says like loyal to the independence of Constitution and the independence Declaration of Independence. Sorry. And you couldn't imagine that this would be actually something you always think that you're writing stuff on T-shirts that are not going to be. So what are your thoughts? I mean, like this is, so again, we heard here in ROI, we heard others, but these are the mainstream people. These are the Likud people. These are the people who are sitting with you on the panels in TV, and they are reclaiming those statements and restating it again and again. And I'm wondering if this is something that you feel is so deep, or is it still going to go away once the indicted prime minister is, I mean, or the crime minister as we call him, is that going away with when we are finishing to save Israel, when we are dealing when the judicial coup is going away, or this is deep because the polls are showing that it's only 80% of the people are against the judicial coup and are, I would say that they probably are loyal to the Declaration of Independence. What are your thoughts? I mean, like I'm just sharing my unbelievable understanding.
I think that I fully understand, and I join, your comment. I was also amazed that this private attorney dared to suggest that, he didn't only
private attorney on behalf of the prime minister, on behalf of the government.
Again, I said the attorney general actually refused to support this legislation, and there is a procedure in Israel once the attorney general actually is in a clash with the government can hire a private a private attorney. I can share with you that they addressed some leading attorneys, constitutional and administrative law attorneys in Israel, and those attorneys refused to represent the government. But in the end, they found someone to represent them. And it's important to emphasize your point of view. There is a valid discussion. What is the constitutional status of this declaration? It was debated in the past. It is debated today. And again, I think that the Supreme Court is going to make a courageous, very important step here by actually ending the debate. And I think that one of the fruits of this current procedure in the court, even if in the end the court will not overrule totally this legislation, will be the establishment of the constitutional status of the declaration. But it's important to understand what Ophir said. Not only it challenged the constitutional status of the declaration in order to suggest that the Knesset has the ability to legislate basic laws that go against the core values of this declaration, he actually tried really to undermine the historical, the educational, the spiritual, the communal status of this declaration. And in the end, Israel is a young country. And while we have a very old religious and cultural tradition as Jews, when it comes to nationhood or to modern nationhood, Israel is a young country. And Israel is a very complicated place. And Israel has to deal with many internal challenges and tensions, and not only with external threats. And they're actually taking one of these, the most basic elements of what Israel is all about as a modern nation. They are actually taking the one piece, one text that was signed by all different segments of the Jewish citizens of the newborn state. None of the Arab citizens signed the declaration because, as you know, the Palestinians didn't support the establishment of the state and the implementation of the UN resolution. But I'm reminding us all that in spite of the fact none of the founding fathers and mothers that signed the declaration were Arab citizens of Israel, in two different paragraphs. The declaration talks about civil equality for all the citizens of Israel, and there is one specific paragraph of addressing the future Arab citizens of Israel, ensuring them full equality and ensuring them that they will be well represented in the governing bodies of the state. And this is, in the end, the only text that was signed by all segments of this newly born Israeli society. Modern Orthodox parties, socialist parties, the ultra-Orthodox parties, even the Israeli Communist Party, that was back then already a Jewish Arab party, sent someone to sign the declaration. And they are actually taking one of the few civil foundations of the state of Israel and trying to push its status back. And why they're doing it? They're doing it again because the declaration doesn't only addresses the Jewish character of the state of Israel, it also addresses its liberal democratic character. Now, definitely the aggressive, ugly, rude way this attorney talked today about the founding fathers and mothers of the state of Israel from right and left was a surprise. But I want to remind you something. When Netanyahu and his partners legislated few years ago what we call the nation-state basic law, Chok HaLeom, they refused to include any reference to the Declaration of Independence in this nation-state basic law. Now, in the end, there is a deep linkage between the nation-state basic law, and I'm not, opening the discussion about the nature of this legislation, but in the end, this basic law is all about the fact that Israel is the nation-state of the Jewish people. There is a deep linkage between the declaration and this nation-state basic law. And still, and it was Yariv Levin, the current Minister of Justice, one of the founding fathers of this judicial coup, that worked extremely hard to exclude any reference to the declaration in the nation-state bill. So you can understand, people tend to think that, Netanyahu woke up after the last election, and because of his criminal procedures, he launched this judicial coup. And I think that you are right by suggesting that, yes, Netanyahu's personal, legal issues and his bad behavior as a politician and as a leader is deeply impacting the size of this judicial coup and the way it is pushed. But it will be a huge mistake for all of us to think that it starts with Bibi and it ends with Bibi. 75 years after the establishment of the State of Israel, we are reaching a critical moment in this internal discussion about the future character of our state. Is it a nation state of the Jewish people, but also the democratic state of all its citizens? And this is, and our state is a member in this extended family of well-established liberal democracies around the world? Or do we belong to this other family of nations that are using the title of democracy, but actually implement a very thin and shaky version of democracy, and definitely a democracy or type of democracy which cannot be seen as a Western liberal progressive democracy? And in that regard, you are right about the numbers. The vast majority of Israelis, and I think that even the vast majority of Jewish citizens in Israel, are still committed to the, wide version of democracy. But we need to remember, and I already said it, the more nationalist and ultra-Orthodox and Messianic camp, which is a minority, they worked for decades to build their infrastructures, and they are coming to this match with a much stronger political and communal infrastructures, and we need to close the gap. And one of the great things about the civil protest is the fact that it's not only about demonstrations, it's also about building communities of activism. And that's our way to close this gap in our infrastructures.
Gilad, thank you. I'll take two more questions. There are a couple that I can combine together. And then I'll have Ben Linder, who is working with us in San Francisco, to talk a little bit more about fundraising. So there is a question about that I will just answer. I mean, so the court cannot force the Knesset to do a constitution. So that's answering one question, and the other question was, and the other question is like, can the legislative branch could disregard the court, the court ruling. So the amazing part is that they already, again, I don't want to make similarities, but imagine the days before the election of the last elections in here, where President already telling in advance that they will not accept the results of the election, because so that's what happened last week in Israel over the last month. There is a keep people saying that the court doesn't have the stand to cancel the laws, and they're not necessarily going to, even Prime Minister Netanyahu wasn't committing to accept it. So that's why we are heading to a constitutional crisis. The other question that Yael from DC was asking is, like, maybe you can talk more about what's going on behind the scene, not on the legal side, but on the Knesset side, and how likely it is that the opposition could actually take down this government by voting.
So first of all, again, we are not at the edge of a constitutional crisis. We are in the midst of a constitutional crisis. We might, face a new chapter in this constitutional crisis, but it is important to remember that this crisis already exists. Why it is important to remind people that the crisis is already here? Because there is a very strong attempt of the coalition and the government to suggest that the court is the one to blame if there is a constitutional crisis, if they take a decision against the Knesset legislation. And they are trying to suggest that it will be the court's fault in order to prevent the court or to place pressure on the court not to take a bold decision. By suggesting or by insisting that we are already in a deep constitutional crisis, we are reminding Israelis, Jews around the world, and lovers of Israel that actually it is the government that created this constitutional crisis. And please, again, talking about the differences between the two systems of government, please, and I know that many of you are aware to it, please remember that in Israel, by definition, the government enjoys a majority in the parliament. And it means that the executive branch is actually leading the legislative branch. And this American phenomena that one or two houses of the parliament are controlled by a party that is the opposition in the opposition to the administration, this is a situation that cannot exist in Israel. So by definition, the legislative branch is in a way under the supervision and the control of the executive branch, and it leaves the judicial branch as the only force that can balance the powers of the executive branch that, by all standards in Israel, is extremely strong. In all international studies of comparative law, it is a known fact that in Israel, the executive branch enjoys enormous power when you compare it to other governments in the Western world. And now they're trying even to push aside or to cancel, or at least to lower dramatically, the ability of the court to balance this massive executive power. Now, in regard to the political situation, first we need to say that in the last few days, and also today, there is a huge discussion about reaching a political compromise, or at least that Netanyahu will present a softer version of the judicial coup, including taking this legislation around the reasonability doctrine back to the Knesset in order to amend it and to present, again, a softer version of this legislation, and by doing that, to avoid the need for a Supreme Court ruling. Now, I said today many times in the Israeli media that we need to stop and try to be Netanyahu's psychologists. For a very strange reason, the Israeli media is obsessive with trying to guess what are the real intentions of Netanyahu. And by doing that, in a way, they are helping him to release himself from the responsibility for this a huge crisis. And the Israeli media, in a very strange way, is helping Netanyahu to present himself as how to say, as a moderate player in this crazy situation, as if he's caught in the hands of the more extreme forces in his government, and is in a way, playing a passive role in this judicial coup, and this is the responsibility of the opposition to release Netanyahu from the hands of those extreme partners.
This was also a letter by Ron Lauder, the same letter by Ron Lauder. Yeah, it's like
and I said today in one of the news channels in Israel, look, that I'm quite disturbed if Netanyahu is so weak vis-a-vis his political partners, how we can stand against Nasrallah and Hezbollah and against Khamenei in Iran. If our prime minister doesn't have the political ability, the political stand to tell his partners enough is enough, I'm the prime minister, I'm responsible for the well-being of the Israeli society, the well-being of the IDF, our relations with our leading strategic partner, the US and its administration, I'm telling you enough is enough. I was elected as prime minister. If he can't do it, he should resign from being Israel's prime minister. But this is not the case. Netanyahu is leading the judicial coup. He's trying to earn time in order to set himself a comfortable visit in New York and a comfortable setting for the meeting with President Biden. And we need to insist that it is Netanyahu. It's not only Yariv Levin, the Ministry of Justice, and Simcha Rotman, the chair of the Constitutional Committee of the Knesset. And unfortunately, there are political forces in Israel that, for good reasons, I understand why they do it, because they are really disturbed with the current situation in Israel. I'm also deeply disturbed with the current situation. I'm a member not only of the Constitutional Committee of the Knesset, I'm also a member of the Security and Foreign Relations Committee, and I'm telling you, the situation is not good, domestically and when it comes to the external threats. So I can understand why Benny Gantz is keep trying, to reach a compromise. But the sad truth is that till now, it doesn't look like that Netanyahu is interested in a compromise, and he's only trying to earn time.
I will add on that, just Gilad, that by the playbook of autocratic legalism, right, by Kim Shapley and others, and you can find more information about this. This is a playbook we are now being played. The basic success of those who are trying to go autocratic is to get legitimacy for broad consensus for what they're trying to do, to actually get that. So if we think that we are in the process, in the playbook, then every compromise, and I know that I hear a lot from our friends in the Jewish organization about the hope to get compromise. So what I'm telling usually is that, like, if we give the legitimacy for the compromise, and someone defined are we going to crash the airplane in 45 degrees or in 90 degrees? There is no compromise on that.
Yes, and I'll just answer in one sentence
Yeah.
to the question that was raised about, the political situation. While we are deeply frustrated with the fact that Netanyahu is fully aligning with his extreme partners, it is important to say that in recent days, while many of the ministers presented a very extreme aggressive approach towards the Supreme Court, we saw some promising signs from leading politicians in Israel, leading ministers, that they understand that we cannot continue in this path. Now, I'm not suggesting that, there is an ability around the corner to take down the government. It is not so close. But when you hear the Ministry of Defense, Yoav Gallant, when you hear the Ministry of Health Services and Interior Affairs that is coming from one of the ultra-Orthodox parties, how he talks about the need to follow the Supreme Court ruling, when you listen carefully to some other Likud ministers and MKs, definitely there is a group of legislators in the coalition that we can work with. The first stage will be to say enough is enough. We're not willing to support any future moves of this judicial coup. And in the longer term, and I'm saying in the longer term, we will have to find a way to separate those moderate Republicans, moderate right-wing legislators from the ultra-nationalist, ultra-messianic, ultra-Orthodox players, and I hope we will succeed to do it in the future.
Gilad, I want to really, really thank you for being with us. I want to give a chance to Ben to say a couple of words. And those of you, I know, Gilad, if you can stay another 10 minutes, because there are really great questions on the chat, and then we can continue. Okay. Ben?
If Israel's Supreme Court judges can sit for 14 or 15 hours, I can...
Okay. I'm just going to try and put Ben out of mute, or he can put himself on.
I'm not muted. I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm
Hi,
just
everyone.
you on the spotlight. Okay.
My name is Ben Linder, and I am one of the amazing group of volunteers. I may not be that amazing, but they are amazing, who keep UnXeptable running. We're working 24 hours a day right now, getting ready for this earthquake that is going to be BB coming to San Francisco, New York, and possibly even Washington, D.C. to meet with President Biden. We are putting together the most creative, loud, and interesting set of protests and actions, because the eyes of Israel will be upon us for the next 10 days. And I'm here to ask for your financial support. It can be $18, it can be $1,800, but whatever you can do to keep this movement going, we would greatly appreciate. None of us get a salary, we're all volunteers, but all of these really creative things like projecting billboards on the UN building that happened a couple nights ago costs hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, the thousands of shirts and banners and signs. So Ophir is putting in the chat 2 links. One of them is for tax deductible contributions, if you'd like the United States government to supplement a little bit of what you're giving. And the other one, if you don't care about the tax deductibility, is our GoFundMe link, where that money goes very, very quickly to us also. So thank you so much for your consideration. Thank you, Rabbi Kariv, and I'm going to turn it back to Ophir and Gilad Kariv. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much. Gilad, another question that came up is really about the foundational. So I'll take it before another question. What do you think is? Is still the Kohelet? So as you probably all know, Danchik, one of the big donors of Kohelet, announced that he will stop the funding for Kohelet. But I woke up today and all the TV channels, all the TV channels. They had a Kohelet person, if not two, talking about everything that is against the basic definition of the independence of declaration. How much do you see Kohelet still involved in this judicial coup?
The answer is yes, with capital letters. I do think that one of the main achievements of UnXeptable and the Israeli Jewish protest overseas in North America was to push Donchik to understand that he cannot be considered as a legitimate philanthropic leader in the Jewish community in North America while he is helping to destroy Israel's democracy. And this was a very important move and a very successful one. Yet, we need to remember that Kohelet today is hooked to the government. You know, you mainly need leading philanthropists when you have no other alternative. But once, in many ways, you are a major player in the government, your need for philanthropy drops. And Kohelet is deeply, deeply involved in the work of this current government. I'll give you one example. Minister Smotrich, the finance minister, and we didn't have the time to talk about what is happening in the territories and the linkage between the de facto annexation that this government is leading in the judicial coup. I'm leaving it aside, and there is also an internal debate in the protest how much focus we need to give to this linkage. It's a legitimate and important debate. I'm leaving it aside, but please keep or take with you the following piece of news. The new economic advisor of Israel's government, or the chief economist in the Ministry of Finance, was trained by Forum Kohelet and worked for Forum Kohelet. What else is needed? What else is needed? And I'm sure that many of you are aware to this effort of many right-wing politicians to cancel the special program that was established by the Wexner Foundation that brought so many Israeli civil service officers to Harvard to study in Harvard. And they worked very hard to cancel this program because Wexner is a progressive foundation, another piece of fake news. And actually what they're trying to do is to push back all those players that helped us to train, to cultivate the Israeli civil service on the basis of democratic values, and to replace them with people from Kohelet. People from Kohelet, people that are trained by Keren Tikva and others.
Gilad, there is a question. I was under the assumption that everyone knows what is Kohelet. So just two sentences about what is Kohelet. Kohelet is a think tank that is run in Israel and is supported by Keren Tikva Fund. And they have been doing an amazing deep work in every part of Israel of changing the way and lobbying. Basically, it's like a lobbying. It's like the NRA in Israel, like making sure that their mission is, and it's funded by same people that are funding, a lot of people who are funding also Trump and other organizations here, and they want to bring whatever they can into Israel to kind of like, again, under the hood, it's about libertarian concept of like the government should not be interfered with, like putting control over kindergarten, like cameras, whatever. But underneath of all of that, this is like about transforming Israel into a messianic theocracy, allegedly. So I will move just further away, further forward. I mean, like Daryl is asking us to Daryl Messinger asking us again to clarify why it's not just an internal matter and why diaspora Jews must pick up. And again, all of you are here, and I will connect it with another question that is like, how do we simplify? So if I was sitting, I'm going to the high holiday service on Friday and Saturday and Sunday for Rosh Hashanah. What is the simplest message I can actually say and record and memorize to say that this is not just an internal matter of Israel, it's actually internal of the Jewish diaspora as well, or democracy lovers?
You know, when it comes to high holiday services, the answer is quite simple. All you need to do is to ask the audience to look straight ahead to the bima, to the main stage, and to identify the fact that on the one side of the arc, you have the American flag or the Canadian flag, and on the other side of the arc, you have the flag of Israel. And regardless to the question, is it a Reform congregation, conservative, reconstructionist, or modern modern Orthodox? You will not find it in Chabad, but you'll find it in all other denominations of North American Judaism. And there is a reason why the flag of Israel is on the bima. This was not the case in 48. If people are aware to the history of North American Zionism, this was not the case in 48 and even in the 50s and 60s. In most of the Reform congregations, conservative congregations, this is the case today. In 99% of all Reform congregations in North America, close to 1,000 synagogues and communities, you'll find the Israeli flag in the sanctuary. And it has to do with the fact that today, in the end, the mainstream of American Jewry understand that the future of Judaism, the future of the Jewish people, will be determined mainly in two places, in North America and in Israel. And in the end, the same way the North American Jewry is playing an enormous role in protecting the interests of the state of Israel. Israel is deeply involved in the future, in the well-being and in the future of North American Jewry. In the end, when you send your kids to Jewish summer camps, they meet their Israeli educators. When your children are going to the campuses, for many years, they went to Hillel. Today, they are invited also by Chabad and Esh Torah. And while the North American Jewish community is funding Hillel, most of the funds of Chabad in the campuses and Esh Torah in the campuses come from the pockets of the Israeli taxpayers. People don't understand it, but Israel today is exporting its Orthodox monopoly. Now, I know that for the average, Reform Jew in America, conservative Jew, definitely the average unaffiliated Jew, they don't see the influence of, messianic, ultra-messianic Judaism in Israel and ultra-nationalist Judaism in Israel. They don't see their influence. But when you remember that Israel is training the modern Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox rabbis that go back to the US and lead the Orthodox congregations, when Israel is funding Chabad and Esh Torah, when Israel is taking the responsibility, are you aware to the fact that this government is trying to politicize Yad Vashem, the national memorial authority for the remembrance of Shoah? The leading institution in the world for the academic investigation of those terrible years, they are trying to politicize it. They are trying to do the same thing that the Polish government tried to do with this area of remembering the Shoah and investigating it. And this is the reality. In the end, all American Jews that come to Israel on birthright and other programs are visiting Yad HaShoah. They are going to the wall. They are visiting Metzadah. And once Israel is actually in the hands of those ultra-nationalist forces, slowly it will root itself also in North American congregations. We need to understand communities. We need to understand those two. In the end, Jerusalem and Babylon were deeply connected. We're deeply, deeply connected. And right now, the modern Jerusalem and Babylon, North American Jewry and Israeli Jewry, those are the two legs of the Jewish people. And if we're not going to win this battle, it will have a huge, devastating impact on the quality of Jewish life in North America. And the other thing we need to remind ourselves that in a very strange way, Israel is playing a critical role in the theology and political ideology of ultra-conservative, ultra-theocratian, if I'm saying the right word, and ultra-nationalist forces in other Western societies. The way the American ultra-right is using the Israeli story, the way Israel became to be an issue in the elections in Brazil, the way the government in Hungary is trying to justify its own moves in Hungary on the basis of what's happening in Israel. It's a very strange situation, but this is the reality. Far right-wing parties in Europe today are inviting Israeli legislators from the coalition in order to wash their image as anti-Semitic parties, and our right-wing politicians are helping them to do it. So we need to understand that Israel is a very small country, but in a very strange way, it plays a very important role in this battle in the Western world between the democratic liberal forces and the anti-democratic anti-liberal forces. And that's another reason why we need to work together.
Thank you, Gilad. And I will end this on the optimistic note that we just learned 10 million people, not unique, over 2 million probably unique, was taking the street in the last 8 months. Every night, maybe every week, almost like sometimes a couple of times a week. Last 2 days ago, we saw tens of thousands coming to support Supreme Court. And again, and as we see, the polls are that 80% of the people in Israel, and I assume that the majority of Jewish diaspora, are all understanding the risk to the country, and they are building the infrastructure. So we are here, we are fighting because we know that we will win. I'm reminding you again, stay tuned, go to the UnXeptable website. On the link tree, you will see the list of all the chapters. If you don't have a chapter, reach out to me, reach out to anyone on UnXeptable. We'll start a new chapter. We're building an infrastructure for many years to come. And with that, remember, New York, San Francisco, and probably anywhere there is an Israeli consulate during the protest in New York, we will be out there. Gilad, I want to wish you and your family Shana Tova, and all the people in Israel, Shana Tova to everyone on the Zoom. And how do we say it? Tichle Shana ve'Klilotea?
Tichle Shana ve'Klilotea. May this year end together with its curses, and may the new year begin with its blessings and hopes. And
Thank you so much. And we'll see you all online and in the next Zoom.
Thank you, Ophir.
Shana Tova.